Hi everyone, my name is Marley and welcome to my channel. On my channel we talk all things filmmaking, acting, and sometimes I do movie reviews. Today it's a movie review. I just watched the movie Persona by director Ingmar Bergman. Now this is a really famous movie, and mostly because Liv Ullmann's performance has been rated one of the top 10 acting performances of all times. I actually discovered Liv Ullmann because I was scrolling on YouTube and I was like, wow, who is this actress? I thought it was an actress from maybe like from the 90s or something. Then I looked her up and she's 87. Like, she's literally the age of my grandma. Like, I have two grandmas. One of them was older, almost 100. She passed away. May she rest in peace. And my other grandma is like younger. So like, she's literally the age of like my grandma, Antonia. So I was just like, oh my God. So I just started watching her movie. I just started kind of like seeing her work because of happenstance. And I realized that she did a lot of film collaborations with, she was Norwegian, and she did a lot of film collaborations with this director called Ingmar Bergman, who was Swedish. And because of that, because they worked really well together, and because he really saw a lot of talent in her, and he saw in her like an actress that he wanted to like write movies for. They did like, I think like 15 films together. But anyways, so I watched Persona, and I'm gonna have a lot of spoilers. So if you don't want me to spoil the movie for you, click off. And if you want me to spoil it for you, go ahead and keep watching. Oh my God, these hairs. Today, the hair has a mind of its own. So anyways, so in Persona, which takes the name from the concept of Carl Jung persona, there are two women who are represented. One of them is Alma, a provincial-looking nurse played by Baby Anderson, and the other is Elisabeth Bogle, or Elisabeth Bogle, played by Liv Ullmann. Now, it is worthy to mention, and I'm going to include the pictures pretty soon, but it is important to mention that both women bear a striking resemblance to each other. They both are around the same height, with Elisabeth being maybe 2 to 3 inches taller than Alma, and they both have, you know, blonde hair and blue eyes. And that's important to mention because at some point throughout the movie, their identities become confused. And I'll reveal why this is important later on. And like I said, before I delve into the movie, I wanted to explain the concept of persona that was posited by the author Carl Jung. Carl Jung posited that the persona is the subconscious, and that a person's persona or subconscious is divided between the good and the bad. Carl Jung postulated that when we suppress the bad persona within us, we project our negative traits onto other people. And our ego, which is sometimes postulated as the good persona, is the part of us that can do no wrong, the part of us that thinks that we can do no wrong to keep us protected. So Carl Jung posited that people kind of split into two. They see themselves as all good and they project all bad into other people. I feel like that was super common. I feel like that's really common everywhere today. Like, you know, we have very strong personalities amongst the world leaders, amongst the leaders of big pharma, amongst the leaders of big corporations. So it wasn't a stretch for Carl Jung to postulate these things. So anyways, the movie starts with Elisabeth Vogel, played by Lee Woolman, um, who as an actress. So Elisabeth is an actress, and the movie starts with her being on stage, and suddenly she goes mute. She has a psychic breakdown. She doesn't say her lines, and she kind of collapses. So she is an affluent actress, and she's married to an older rich husband. So she's able to afford the best of healthcare. So it's implied that she gets put into a hospital, a mental hospital. And we see the woman lying in a white dress. And she apparently has refused to talk and move for months at this point. Now, it is revealed that Elisabeth is not talking by choice. It is revealed that she chooses not to talk, and she's exploring the character of a mute patient like an actress. Like the doctor insinuates that, because the doctor that like treats her, she's a woman that sees that looks like she can see through bullshit really easily. She comes up to her and she says, look, play the mute all you want. You can go to my summer house to recover. I'm gonna assign you your nurse Alma to go to the summer house to recover. Play this character, play mute, do what you gotta do, and then let it go. Go back to your life. And Elisabeth looks at her with like those like that statuesque beauty of hers and agrees, right? So the character of Alma and the character of Elisabeth get sent to the doctor's summer home to recover. Now, it's also important to mention that in this movie, Elisabeth actually does not talk throughout the entirety of the movie, except for some parts. Alma is the one that does most of the talking. Alma is represented as this very like carefree, loving young nurse who is supposed to be like a few years younger than Elisabeth, Lee Ullman's character. And, and they get sent off to their summer home. This movie's also shot in black and white. And at the beginning of the movie, Elisabeth wears a lot of black, whereas Alma is always wearing white, like a nurse wears white all of the time. And you would even think at the beginning of the movie, like upon observing these two women in this summer home, you would think that it's just two friends or two sisters or maybe even two girls falling in love with each other. Like you really can't really tell what's going on, but you could tell that like there is some sort of connection within them. It quickly stops being a patient-nurse relationship and it becomes like a friendship. And some people, like I said, have even said like some sort of like a love affair. I would have to agree, but I will tell you guys why later. So again, like part of the recovery is that Alma treat Elisabeth and talk to her like and get her to talk. And Elisabeth is just doing a really good job of like being quiet, of like not talking, of like just being mischievous and not talking. Like literally Alma will literally tell her life story. Will turn around and be like, and then when I was like so and so age, I got pregnant by this boy that I slept with on the beach, and then I had to get an abortion, and my husband didn't know it wasn't his, and I don't even know whose it was. And then she'll just start crying, and Elisabeth will literally be like with a cigarette in her hand, looking like a statue, just looking at her like this. Like completely unreadable. And then sometimes like they'll be talking and Alma will be like, I really like having you around. Having you around is like a sister that I never had. I was raised by boys. I like boys, but there could have been a girl in the house. And then all of a sudden like Elisabeth will break into a smile and like we'll kiss her neck and like we'll massage her. So it's like, and then like they'll end up sleeping in the same bed together. So it's like a whole lot of like interacting for a patient who has been who doesn't move or talk. right? So these girls are moving and talking in each other's presence. What starts being a little like, what stops being sweet and starts being a little like crazy is when all of a sudden, like, Alma notices what the doctor noticed, which is, again, and Alma is the character played by Bibi Andersson, who, I just checked her up. She just passed away, but she was an incredible Swedish actress. You guys should look her up, Bibi Andersson. I'll write it in the caption below. So everything starts getting a little fishy, a little weird when Alma all of a sudden stops being satisfied with opening herself up to this very quiet, stoic character that is Elisabeth, played by Lee Woolman. Alma starts calling bullshit. Alma starts being like, why am I opening up to this girl if, like, she's just pretending to be mute? Like, I know she can talk. If she wanted to talk to me, she could talk to me. Like, Alma's like, I've been at this for like 2 weeks already, or I don't know, a month or a few days. I don't know. Time and technology and normalcy do not apply in this movie. But what does happen is, like I said, Alma starts getting angry because it's like relationships have to be mutual. Like, you give, you receive. And if you give and somebody pointedly withholds, not because they can't give, but because they are withholding, it pisses anyone off. So Alma got really angry. She was like, I refuse to keep opening myself up to you, and you are not mute. You are full of bullshit, and you're pretending. And then the movie just descends into madness. Like, Elisabeth doesn't drop it. Like, at some points, like, you wonder if, like, Elisabeth, if she's actually mute. Like, at some points it just looks like Alma, the nurse, is just like attacking Elisabeth because she keeps telling Elisabeth that Elisabeth is this horrible person for like judging her and listening to her and not opening up, and that she's heartless, and that, like, how could she say that she's her friend, and how is she humiliating her? So then sometimes it looks like Alma is just abusing her patient that she's getting paid money to take care of, right? At some point I was like, where are the cops coming? Because how is this nurse abusing her patient? And then at some point you kind of see Alma's point, because like you do see like that Elisabeth is like, is healthy, and that she's, you know, that she's beautiful, and that she's like, she doesn't look ill is the thing. And you do start realizing, and you're just like, why is she so silent? Like, she does not look like a patient. She looks like somebody who's very much in control of her choice. So then you do kind of like question Elisabeth's nobility. You're just like, why are you doing this? So then sometimes, like, when Alma abuses Elisabeth, you're kind of like, she deserved it. But sometimes it is too much, you know? Sometimes, like, Alma, like, she goes too far, and then you realize that Alma is just like projecting the negative parts of herself onto Elisabeth, because Elisabeth hasn't done anything. Elisabeth is just being mute. And then you get into the backstory, and then you realize that, like, you know, women today and women in the 1960s, like, they had reasons for being angry. Elisabeth was a theater actress, so she always was expected to look pretty, to not age, to play a part. And then it is revealed that she's married to a guy that looks like he's 70 years old. So that's also probably part of the problem. And it's revealed that Alma is in love with a young man, you know, that she loves, that she genuinely loves. So I guess in that sense, like, maybe you can understand Elisabeth's pain, that, like, although from the outside it looks that she's more privileged than Alma, because Alma is like basically like a nurse in a mental health ward. You also empathize with Elisabeth, because you're just like, well, the life of an actress might look glamorous from the outside, but it really does have a lot of like sacrifices. Like, maybe like Elisabeth doesn't want to act anymore. Maybe she doesn't want to be married. Maybe she wishes she could be like Alma, and maybe she wishes she had studied nursing so she could like make a paycheck, like, no matter if she wants to say her lines or not, or no matter if she looks a certain way or not. You know, you really do you really do wonder those things, especially for women of the times, you know, like the era was the 1960s. And then the movie gets even more trippy. So, so you start seeing the characters like divide more and more. Like you notice that like Elisabeth starts being portrayed in almost like as the good side of the persona. Elisabeth is portrayed almost as like, as she doesn't talk, therefore she cannot reveal flaws about herself. Therefore, the only thing you can do is project negativity onto her. So that's almost like the ego of people wants to protect people by not talking about oneself. But in doing so, sometimes you allow people to project their negativity upon you. So then that's not so good, right? That's not integrated. A healthy ego has to understand that there are flaws in oneself, but that there are also virtues in oneself, and that it's better to integrate that than to just not be able to defend oneself when somebody projects on you. Like, for example, like when you see Elisabeth being helpless and when you see Alma projecting negativity onto her, when you see Alma calling her heartless, when you see Alma calling her entitled, cruel, you really wish that Elisabeth would say something, you know? And for good or for bad, like Liv Ullmann has always had kind of like a baby angel phase. In fact, she was called the Norwegian angel. So it's like you really do feel for her because it's like she literally does have a baby phase. She literally looks almost childlike. So you're just kind of like maybe she's flawed and she is withholding her speech, but surely she doesn't deserve all this abuse, right? So you wish she would speak up for herself. But at the same time, there is a side of Elisabeth that enjoys the power that her silence has over Alma, because Alma just like combusts in front of her and turns into putty in her hands and is almost like half smitten, half wants to adopt her as a sister, half wants to kill her. Like Alma goes crazy in Elisabeth's presence, and Elisabeth does nothing but withhold her speech, which is all that Alma needs to find peace, to feel seen. Elisabeth doesn't allow Alma to feel seen, despite knowing and being told repeatedly that the only thing Alma wants to do is to feel seen by Elisabeth's speech. Elisabeth doesn't give that to her. So in those moments, her baby face turns into calculated cruelty. And you do wonder how somebody who could kind of look so angelic could do something so cruel to her friend, to this young woman who is taking care of her, who's pouring her soul out to her. You do wonder that. So Elisabeth is neither the victim nor the victor. Alma is a little bit more complicated. Alma projects hatred, but loves. Alma, at one point, almost threw a pot of boiling water at Elisabeth so that Elisabeth would yell so that she could prove that it was Elisabeth. And then she mocked Elisabeth and she said, you see, you're not mute. So Alma's that type of person. But Alma is also caring. Alma is also all consumed by the noble trade that is being a nurse. Alma also insults Elisabeth, but runs after her and cries for her forgiveness. Alma both projects all of her flaws onto Elisabeth, but yet also projects all of her positive qualities onto Elisabeth. And then the trippiest climax of the movie, I think, is after the night that Alma and Elisabeth seem to spend together. There's a night where Alma is sleepless. And like I said, like sometimes the girls end up sleeping in the same bed together because they just fall asleep out of tiredness. But for the most part, they have their own bed. So Alma was sleeping in her bed and she sees a presence, and it's Elisabeth in her room. Alma gets up, Elisabeth folds her head and it simulates an intimacy. The camera simulates like the occurrence of intimacy between the two women. So the next morning, Elisabeth and Alma are outside, and Alma asks Elisabeth, the quiet one, played by Liv Ullmann, and she says, "Were you in my room yesterday?" And Elisabeth gives a devilish smirk, and she says, "No." Like, she doesn't say it, but she gives like a dismissive, devilish smirk, which to me implies that she was in her room. But like, again, Elisabeth being Elisabeth, like, didn't want to give Alma what she was always asking for, which was to be seen, first by her speech and now by her acknowledgement of having been in her room. So Elisabeth yet again finds another opportunity to take away her Alma's ability to be seen, and she takes it. Now here's the trippy part. The trippy part is that, like, sometimes you do wonder if Elisabeth was actually in Alma's room, or if maybe Alma was just so like consumed by tiredness and malady that she might have imagined Elisabeth in her room. However, I like observing patterns and utilizing them. So based on the pattern of Elisabeth's mischievous streak and Elisabeth's enjoyment of the withholding of the piece of Alma, I would have to say that Elisabeth was in Alma's room. But obviously Alma doesn't know any better. And it's stipulated, it's shown throughout the rest of the film that like Alma has kind of like erotic experiences in her bed. And it's always implied that Elisabeth is a part of these experiences. So poor Elisabeth doesn't know that in 2025, that is harassment. But this was the 60s, so she does as she does. Anyways, it made for a good movie. So the climax of the movie though comes here. It comes when Elisabeth's elderly husband, and I say elderly because that man looked like he was in his 70s. He shows up and he talks to Alma, the nurse, who is in nurse attire. And he just starts calling her Elisabeth. He says, "My love, I'm so happy to see you. They miss you in the theater. Our son misses you. You know, I'm going to buy him some toys, blah, blah, blah." And then you see like the hand of the husband. And Alma's like, "Mr. Vogler, I'm not your wife. I'm the nurse." And then Elisabeth appears, and then the man just keeps talking to her like if she was his wife. And then Elisabeth appears behind Alma in that instant, like dressed all in black, like super stoic, with her evil baby face like this. And she like takes Alma's hand and puts it like on the face of the husband. And I thought that moment was very symbolic because it almost symbolizes, in my view, how men viewed women in those times. I mean, even now you could argue, but especially in those times, how, you know, two women who were both, you know, similar age, similar phenotypes, like interchangeable, you know? Sad but true. And I think that's what that moment is meant to symbolize. I don't really think, some people interpret it as Elisabeth and Alma actually having been the same person throughout the entirety of the film. But I don't believe that, simply because my mind needs structure to hold on to. I refuse to see patterns and facts and let them all go into the wind. I think that would cause madness within me. I choose to recognize patterns when I see them. So from the patterns that I saw in the movie, I think that Elisabeth and Alma were very much different people, especially because they're played by different actresses. And I think that that moment was intended to symbolize like, just like the objectification of women, especially women of like similar phenotypes, like how a man of his age and a man of his implied status and power, you know, like would simply see females of a certain gender, females of a certain demographic and a certain phenotype as interchangeable. Like, I'll I'll take 10 of these little bitches. I'll take 10 of these little blonde bitches. You know, like that's kind of the vibe the husband was giving. So what has to happen happens, and Elisabeth's husband, like, it's implied that he is intimate with the nurse. And the nurse, like, doesn't resist Elisabeth's direction. When Elisabeth takes her hand and puts it on the cheek of her husband, she does not resist, and she doesn't say, Elisabeth, this is crazy. Elisabeth, I'm not going to do this. Like, she loses herself in Elisabeth, and she sleeps with her husband. So then the husband gets up, as a husband does, and walks away. You never see him again. He went out for milk. And then Elisabeth and Alma kind of like I guess they start wrapping it up. Like, I think they confront each other a couple more times. I think Alma sets out a booby trap. Elisabeth cuts herself. She wants Elisabeth to yell. Elisabeth doesn't yell. And then at the end, like, after and then the confrontation happens where, like, Alma almost, like, throws boiling water at Elisabeth so that Elisabeth can, like, give her the ability to be seen through her speech. So Elisabeth does yell, and Alma is satisfied with that. And she says to her, you see, you weren't mute. She walks away. After that instance, both women pack up to leave. Elisabeth gets her suitcase and puts her nice clothes in it, and Alma cleans up the place. A big car comes, takes Elisabeth away, and our poor Alma has to, like, take a country bus and gets taken away too. There's no goodbyes, there's no forgiveness, there's no apologies. And then in the next scene, we see Elisabeth lying with a big camera in front of her, and it's implied that she moved on from theater into the big pictures. And Alma, we don't see again. The last scene that we see of Alma is her taking the country bus back home to marry her husband and to have children. And I think that the big message of Persona is that the ego and the subconscious, or whatever parts exist inside of a person, I think the message is that it's very dangerous to not consolidate them. It's very dangerous for them not to be in communication with each other, because they cause unwellness and chaos within the person, as they do within two different people. And they also cause a confusion in others who are also disconnected from themselves and from other people. And then this confusion, this disconnect, kind of drops people into complacency. In the same way that Alma didn't fight Elisabeth back and slept with her husband, which I don't think Alma wanted to do. You know, she looks very sad. I think that the integration of the good and the bad within the person, within the persona, is the thing that can help us come back to ourselves, is the thing that can integrate ourselves. Like, maybe, who knows, maybe like if Elisabeth and Alma had actually had a conversation with each other, if Elisabeth had given her the gift of seeing Alma, maybe Alma could have seen Elisabeth in the way she wanted to be seen. Yeah, and I remember before the end of the movie, Alma reveals to Elisabeth that she's been studying her, and that she knows that Elisabeth never wanted to be a mother. That Elisabeth wished that her son would have been born a stillborn. Elisabeth looks at Alma with tears in her eyes and horror, because Alma has discovered her deepest, darkest secret. And Alma says, and that's why you're here pretending to be a mute, because you are so guilty and you hate your life and you feel like you're such a horrible person and you wanted to run away from it all. And that's why we ended up here in this summer home. And then after that, like, they clean up and they go their separate ways. But one would think, like, what if these girls would have had a conversation? Like, maybe Alma wouldn't have to go back home in a country bus to the mental health ward. You know, maybe Alma could have been invited to the theater. Maybe Elisabeth wouldn't have to feel so empty that she ends up in the mental health ward or ends up going on a speech strike. Maybe If she could have friends, if she could have the ability to have friends, maybe she could connect with others that make her feel seen. Maybe she could discover more of herself through her connection through other people. So I think that's the lesson of persona, how unfortunately the complexities that we have within ourselves, if we don't address them, they not only end up hurting ourselves, but they also end up inhibiting the way we communicate with others and end up hurting others as well. So persona invites us to look inward and to make sure that we allow others the gift of being seen through us. Because perhaps that's what's gonna push humanity forward. Perhaps that's the point of life. To love, to allow others to see us, to be seen, to be kind, and to help others heal through that. Perhaps that is the meaning of life. Okay, well, that's 30 minutes. Well, I hope you guys liked this. Bye. Till next time.